There he is.
Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us tonight for the Real ID, everything you need to know and more. The deadline is coming up, and we at the Virginia State Conference in ACP wanted to ensure you had all the information so that you can get your Real ID and you can let our members, your neighbors, and other community members understand the process. So welcome to everyone. Tonight, we are joined by several experts that will be able to answer your questions. We ask that all questions are placed in the Q&A just to make it easier for us to get you the right answers. A recording of tonight will be shared along with resources tomorrow, so be on the lookout. So welcome to everyone. As we are gathering, if you don't mind, drop your name in the chat. Let us know who you are, who is joining us. I see so many people from across the Commonwealth. We're excited to have you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're going to get started in just about 1 minute. So welcome to the Real ID, everything that you need to know in preparation for the May 7th deadline. If you have questions tonight, we do ask that you place those questions in the Q&A so that we can get everyone the answers as soon as possible. And again, we will share tonight's recording along with resources with everyone tomorrow. So welcome. And as promised, the time is now 7:03. I am pleased to first introduce you all to our Regional Vice President and Political Action Chair, Ms. Gayleen Knoyton.
Thank you, Karen. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining this very, very important webinar. As you know, this is a very, very important election that's coming up. And we're in a time right now that we have to have everything in place. And so the Real ID is going to be really, really important. We don't know what this administration might do. We want to make sure that everyone is prepared and have their Real ID. And we want to make sure you know all the particulars, how to get what you need, where to go, to get your Real ID. So we have some experts that's going to be on the line with us to talk about this as well. So as you put your name in the chat and where you're from, please add if you have a Real ID already. And if you have a Real ID, put it in. We want to see how many people have a Real ID, already as well. So if you can do that, that's great. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our state president, President Reverend Cozy Bailey, to give us a greeting. Reverend Bailey.
Thank you, Gayleen, and welcome everyone. It is a pleasure to be with you once again. One of the things that we want to ensure that our membership and those who are affiliated with the NAACP is that we are totally and accurately informed and educated about the requirements that it takes to be a viable resident and citizen of the Commonwealth and the United States. Tonight, as Karen has already told you, we have a panel of experts who are going to be mythbusters and truth tellers to ensure that you all have the correct information going forward. We thank you all for joining us. And with that, I'll turn it back to Gayleen and let's get started.
All right. Great. Thank you so much, President Bailey. We are fortunate to have several great speakers that we have with us. And Tyler Sterling is with he's the National Campaigns Director for the NAACP and also with Civic Engagement. And then we also have Liza McClanahan, and she is also with the National NAACP. And we have Stacey Bailey, who is the second vice president of the Hampton branch NAACP, and she also works as the deputy clerk of court in Newport News. So she's a member of the NAACP, and she'll be able to give us some information on documents. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Tyler, so you can give us an overview on what is needed and what this Real ID is all about. Thank you.
All right. Good evening, everyone. As Gayleen had just noted, my name is Tyler Sterling. I am the National Campaigns Director at the NAACP National Office. It's a bit of a different role for me talking to you here in this space. Usually I'm all things either voter protection or getting out the vote. And I see questions in the chat already regarding about Real ID and what it means for your voting status or your voting process. We'll go over some of that information, but always an honor to be speaking with members of not my home state, but where I reside now in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So excited to be on this call with everyone. I'm going to bring up some slides here. Please feel free to continue utilizing the Q&A function for all of your questions. But I do still want to keep seeing those of you that are joining now. We want to know if you have a Real ID or not. Please put that into the chat so we can know kind of as we're guiding this conversation, if it is more so on what exactly you need to do to get those documents, or if this is more education based for us to educate the communities, our friends, our family members on all things regarding the Real ID. So please continue utilizing that Q&A function. I am sharing my screen here. Let me get to full screen. So what is the Real ID anyway? Essentially, Real ID came out of some protective measures out of the 9/11 Commission's recommendation. This is a form of identification to indicate who a person is, to make state-issued IDs more secure and standardized. It is an attempt to make state issues and standardized. You may say the 9/11 Commission, we're talking back to 2001. Yes, we are talking back to 2001 as to when this information and things were developed as arrived. In Virginia, getting a Real ID means adding a little gold or black star to your ID in the right-hand corner of your ID. But after May 7th, this deadline that is applying, you will need that ID or another federally approved form of identification to do two things. It is the two things that what you need a Real ID for. If you are boarding domestic flights, or if you're entering certain facilities like a military base or a federal courthouse. Those are the two cruxes of which the Real ID hinges upon. Boarding domestic flights and entering certain federal facilities. If you're not flying or visiting a federal building anytime soon, you don't technically, we'll put that in air quotes, technically need one. The intention of all of this call is to make sure we're driving on getting that Real ID. You know you're going to need it, and we want to get on the front end of some things that we'll talk about with regards to voting a little bit later throughout my slides. I only have a few slides, about 7 or 8, but want to open up for some questions and make sure we're getting all of the right information. But your regular Virginia license will still work for driving and day-to-day business. It is primarily hinging upon those boarding domestic commercial flights. I don't know who in here, y'all got flying private money. All right, I see y'all, but we're talking about flying commercial flights, boarding commercial domestic flights, and then entering federal facilities. Get to my next slide here. Oops. So how to get one. So in talking process, and anyone who has gone to Department of Motor Vehicles or an MVA has seen that you got to make sure you have everything that you need there, because it can either be an all-day situation or you can be turned away right on the spot. So I want to make sure you have all of your necessary documentations. Here's what you'll need to provide to bring those: proof of identity or legal presence. That's a valid passport, a certified birth certificate, or a lawful permanent resident card, that LPR card. Proof of your social security number. So that social security card, a W-2 or a pay stub with the full identification number of your social security number. We have 2 proofs of your Virginia residency. So an example of a utility bill, a mortgage statement, or a bank statement with that same address. So in all of these instances, that address needs to be consistent as well. Consistency amongst that address. And then we've got the proof of any legal name changes. So if you have your current legal name does not match your proof of identity. A big example here is going to be a marriage and or divorce certificate, divorce decrees. So indicating that where I want to get to this is consistency amongst all 4 of these documentations. The same spelling, the same name, the same address. Consistency amongst all of these documents. And then a little note or flag here that you must bring the originals. No copies or scanned documents are going to be accepted. And of course, there is a $10 fee to upgrade. Now, none of this is coming free, but it's a $10 to upgrade from your current Virginia standard driver's license to the Real ID Virginia driver's license. If you miss the deadline, and so let's be real, people are going to miss the deadline. If you miss that, you can still drive with your regular license. There is no issue on the driving component. However, then cannot board a domestic flight unless you show an alternatively accepted federal ID. So I saw in the chat, multiple individuals were like, I know I don't have my real ID, but I got my passport. That valid U.S. passport is still accepted for domestic travel, domestic and international travel. But U.S. military ID is still being accepted. And I say is still being accepted because we have seen what this administration is doing, and it's not the intention of this call to get on the administration and talk about the current state, but we've seen with this administration how they treat veterans. Would not surprise me if that U.S. military ID gets some more restrictions attached onto it. So that U.S. military ID is still in fact an acceptable document, as well as the Department of Homeland Security trusted travel card. So anything like global entry. We've got any jet setters here on the call. You've got your global entry. You will be good and be set still with that. But if you plan to fly and do not have a real ID by May, you're going to need to prove either one of these 3 alternate IDs that are up here, or apply for your real ID at the DMV as soon as possible and use any expedited services. They likely, unless you really know somebody there, they're not going to accept an email that says, I applied for it. Like, I'm in the process of getting these documents. They're going to need the actual documents themselves. So you need to apply and then expedite that process. So TSA will be strict. They're strict with water bottles. They're strict when I bring toothpaste over the certain amount of size. Like, they're going to be strict on this identification piece. So I wouldn't expect, leniency or just like, oh, get me through. It's May 8th. I really need to get to this trip. Like, you should really plan on this. If you do not have any of those accepted alternate federal IDs, really plan your travel as we're approaching summer. Make sure you are planning ahead of time for this information to have all of these necessary documents to bring, or alternative pieces of identification. A few myths about the Real ID. Real ID is mandatory for everyone. No, it is only mandatory if you want to fly domestically or enter those secure federal buildings. So it is mandatory if, in fact, you want to do either 2 of those options. And with the accepted federal pieces of identification like the global travel entry, military card, and/or passport, those are the only 3 pieces of information or identification cards that will circumvent the Real ID in the instance you want to fly domestically and/or enter a federal courthouse or like a military base. Those are the pieces that will circumvent that Real ID. The myth number 2, Real ID places your passport. It does not. For all international travel, you will still need your passport for all international travel. And then Real ID affects voting rights. At this exact point in time, the Real ID does not affect your voting rights. But if there is anything that we know about this administration and their attempts to make voting harder each and every day, if we can do some forecasting, there are attempts to incorporate some components of the Real ID and those identifying documents and bring that into the voting sphere. So it is a good, good practice to consider and getting that Real ID as soon as possible in case there are some things that come policy-wise that do get in the way, not get in the way, that conflate or, combine the need for Real ID and your need or ability to be able to vote. So it is our recommendation that, if you don't have travel, you don't need to rush to get to do this, but it is our recommendation that you get your Real ID because there are going to be some things, I think, coming out of both local and federal policy that do require that Real ID. As of this exact moment, and knocking on wood, as of May 7th, Nothing would be required in terms of a real ID for voting, but we want to make sure that we are just providing everyone with as much information, and you can make your own decisions as to how you will, what you're going to operate on, and if you get the ID or not. With regards to voting, we want to set a few things clear here. You do not need a real ID to vote in Virginia. Voting laws and requirements are completely separate from real ID rules. At this exact point in time, voting ID or voting laws and real ID are separate. However, when you vote, the current list of things to show in Virginian forms of ID are including your DMV issued your DMV issued driver's license, whether that is real ID stamped with the gold or black star in the right-hand corner or not, a U.S. passport, your Virginia voter ID card, a student ID issued by a Virginia college or university, and we saw some of those challenges coming forth in this last election cycle with student IDs as to voting, and then a utility bill, bank statement, government check, or paycheck showing your name and address. And then there's some other additional documents, but this is just to show the other IDs or forms of ID that are acceptable to get you into voting right now. And this last note, I do want to note, and this is something that Gayleen is always getting on me on, is about provisional ballots. And so you do have the written in law in Virginia, even if you show up to the polls without voter ID, you are able to cast a provisional. And I'm going to leave it at that. We want to always cast your ballot. If you are being told you are able to cast a ballot, whether it's provisional or non-provisional, we want you to cast that. But just want to prep everyone with the information that is needed to make your own decision as to what ID, as to when you go through this process. So in verifying your voter registration, if you are on this call with without using your cell phone, or you're on this call on any device other than your cell phone, you've got something with a camera, I'm going to ask folks to scan this QR code and just verify your voter registration. I'm never going to miss an opportunity to make sure everyone that we're talking to is registered to vote. So I want to make sure that you verify this registration. This QR code will be sent in the follow-up information that everyone has. All of the information or the scans that you get to this QR code get attributed to the Virginia State Conference as a whole. So as we look at, from the national office, challenges and things and looking at activity throughout states, every person that uses this QR code, it will be attributed to the tally mark of the Virginia State Conference. So the Commonwealth of Virginia and your state conference as a whole will get credit for those that fill out this information. Many of you on this call and names that I've seen have seen me go through a vote.org presentation. This is vote.org. This is a verified tool through vote.org, and you've heard from me and Liza and Stephanie Owens and Amari Fenoy and Dominic Whitehead and all the folks on our team talking about voter registration and the tools that we have available. This is the vote.org verifying your voter registration tool. And I will just put one little caveat here within this tool. If you are using the autofill function on any of your devices, be careful with that, because sometimes there's a space, like my name, first name Tyler, Tyler. Sometimes it loads up with a space after my R, and that puts a junk into the data. So be careful of autofill when you're filling out forms online at times, because it may incorporate spaces, and spaces count as characters. And then it's looking for, on the back end of the database, in the voter registration database, it's looking for Tyler with a space after my name versus just the 5 characters or letters that are in my name. It's a little bit of a nuance there, but I say that in case someone has scanned this QR code and says, I'm registered to vote. I know for a fact I'm registered to vote. Why is this saying that I'm not registered? Be careful if you use that autofill function. And then the next QR code here, this is for all Virginia voter forms. This links directly to your Virginia elections page. So your state page that has all of the necessary forms for voting. That is requesting absentee. That is information that you need to be registered 22 days before the primary election. All of that information. So 22 days before June 17th is when everyone needs to be registered to participate into this primary election. You need to have that registration settled beforehand. And then I've got a few talking points. These were actually provided from both Liza on the call and Miss Stephanie Owens around the court ruling that happened today coming out of the district court in Washington, D.C., with regards to pausing or stopping the Trump executive order, the Trump administration executive order with regards to voting, the executive order on elections and necessary personal identifying documents with regards to voting. And so the legal ruling and victory, we do see this as a victory. So if I can get like some reactions, some claps, some chats, put something into the chat. There's not a whole lot of good coming out of the courts these days, but this is certainly something that we see as a stopgap to what is being attempted to be done at the federal level. A federal judge in Washington, D.C. has blocked through a preliminary injunction a core part of the president's executive order that is the executive order that was requiring documentary proof of citizenship on the federal voter registration form. So for federal elections, this is what this is kind of strictly applying to. We want to indicate that this is by all means a breach of executive overreach. The executive order represents unprecedented overreaches of presidential power. We are seeing this on all efforts up and down. Was talking with Leader Knoyton before this call around what is happening around Act Blue right now and the targeting of Democratic donations and solicitations. Like, this is an overreach to likes we have never seen. And so by us being prepared and having all the information at our hands, that is how we can circumvent this. Outside of the legal strategy that the national office is engaging in lawsuits and the advocacy efforts, you got to put your oxygen mask on first. And that is what we're talking about here, being informed about the individual level of information. What the executive order sought to do or seeks to do currently is require documentary proof of citizenship in order to register, allow federal agencies to access your voter data, decertify voting machines, and interfere with election technology. That is a big one. Interfering with those election machines. If you remember what happened with Dominion in 2020 around the Iowa caucus, if you remember what happened even in some states last year, if a voting machine goes down and you switch to paper ballots, it causes chaos. And these are the questions that Liza and Miss Stephanie Owens and our team always are trying to prepare you with for your conversations with your local clerks of what do you do in the instance of these things. Well, the voting machines, it is an attempt to interfere with the construction or the way that the things are tabulated, not necessarily full counts, but how information comes into the voting machine. And then it would modify mail-in ballot deadlines and procedures. And that is something to which Virginia has seen a big swing through over the past couple years of both mail-in and early voting being taken up by not just, progressive voters, but the conservative voters in Virginia and Governor Youngkin himself making a push for individuals to vote early and to vote by mail. So this one, it would modify mail-in ballot deadlines and procedures and just make that process even more convoluted of you receive it 14 days before election day and you have to request it 34 days up until this time. It's just going to make that process a lot more confusing. And then there's how we message around this. How are we messaging and what are we saying about this victory or about this court serving as a stopgap and this DC District Court serving as a stopgap? The Elections Clause and Electors Clause of the United States Constitution assign rulemaking authority to Congress and the states, not the president. That is point blank. The Elections Clause and the Electors Clause, meaning as elections happen and then the electors report to Congress and they send the votes up, like that whole process, like that is not dictated by the president. It is only dictated through Congress and the states working in conjunction. And then the Campaign Legal Center, so indicating who we got the information from, Jonathan Diaz at the Campaign Legal Center. The president cannot rewrite the election rules or direct independent election bodies like the EAC. So this is essentially reaffirming the constitutional principles. When we are messaging the win here that is happening or how we are perceiving the information that has come out of the DC District Court, that the president cannot rewrite election rules or direct independent election bodies, and direct independent election bodies. And I've got one more here. So who is impacted by all of this information? 21 million people who lack easy access to citizenship documents, and 21 people may be honestly, nationally, federally, may be an underestimate of how many individuals are affected to access citizenship documents. I'm thinking right off the top of my hand, if you can remember, we're very close. We border North Carolina. The storms that happened last year, people lost a lot of those documents. They lost citizenship documents. They lost birth certificates. They lost social security cards. So we got to think about natural disasters here and not just those who lack the easy access to these documents. Then we've got 69 million married women whose legal names differ from that on their birth certificate. I think, Leader Knoyton, you had this issue as well when you were trying to go get your passport and your documentation and all the necessary things. You've got to bring the actual certificate that shows the name change. Like it's just a small nuance, but it affects 69 million individuals nationwide. And this is part of, we're going now, as we talk through who it affects, et cetera. This is the messaging framework. This is why we are in favor of the ruling that came out of the DC District Court, is that this executive order is one piece of a much larger agenda to decrease voter participation and to make sure that, and to decrease voter participation, and on the inverse, to suppress voter access. This is aligned with the SAVE Act and the restrictive state level legislation. The court is specific to the EO and not the SAVE Act. So the court order is this order that is stopped or paused, this documentary proof providing necessary stipulation in order to register to vote. This is only specific to the executive order. The SAVE Act that has passed the House and that is going through the Senate, we don't have necessarily an update as to when we think that will be proposed. And I will open or pass this to Ms. Liza after this, because I'm sure there's something I might have missed or may have hit in a different way. But this is the court ruling only applies to the executive order, not the SAVE Act. The executive order and the SAVE Act are a part of a broad coordinated attack on democracy, continuing the election denial movement. This is branching off of the big lie, the big steal. This is yet another way to try and suppress our vote. It's a multi-pronged attack on democracy. You see it happening everywhere. We see it happening from federal workers. We see it happening from teaching our history. Like, all of those parts feed into how we operate as a society and how our democracy operates, and understanding our history. It's just another way that this administration is attempting to attack our ability to participate in democracy, electing individuals that will represent us. Then I'm going to go to the ongoing resistance. So although the court decision is a critical win, the legal battles are going to continue. And you can anticipate some information coming from the National Office of General Counsel on our involvement in a number of lawsuits coming very soon as to what the National NAACP Office of General Counsel is doing. But we are in the legal battles. We are in on the legal battles, either being declarants. I think I myself am actually a declarant on one of our lawsuits with regards to the voter, the lawsuit around documentary proof of voter registration, and how we have pushed forth on making sure that we are putting our name out there as a signee onto these lawsuits. And then the importance of not just defending against these measures, but also using some affirmative visioning. And what we mean by affirmative visioning, putting forth positive voter registration and voter engagement acts, like the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, like the laws that have happened in the state of Michigan, like laws that have happened in the state of New York. There's a common theme here in both Michigan and New York, in that their governor's offices are held by progressive individuals. And so you notice when you are able to affect at the top of the ticket, we're able to see those sweeping changes broadly that affect every voter into in the state. And so that's just my little plug for, we got GOTV coming up after this primary, and we're going to be needing to make sure that we are getting out the vote and educating all of our communities, not only about Real ID, not only about these impeding or restrictive voter registration laws, but that's just a plug for, we got to make sure that we have the right individuals in the governor's mansion to ensure that we are getting the laws and the kickback that is necessary to ensure we can participate in our democracy. So with that, I will actually pause and pass it over to my friend here, Liza, and see if there is anything that I have left out, anything you want to make sure you can be a little more clear on, or just kick the floor over to you.
Thank you, Tyler, and it's a pleasure to be talking to folks in the Commonwealth, my former home. I now live in Florida, but I get to work with the national office on occasion, especially during the 2024 election. Whoa. So there are 3 things going on here that involve your having a birth certificate and other documents, but they all are separate activities and they overlap here and there, but not completely. So Tyler was talking about the SAVE Act, which is a bill that he mentioned passed the US House and is now over in the Senate, and they can take it up at any point in time. But it requires a procedural vote called cloture, which requires 60 votes before it can bring it to the floor for discussion. So we are all hoping, because we're looking at things affirmatively, that there are not 60 votes to bring this bill to the floor, but it also requires documentary proof of citizenship in order to vote. It mentions the Real ID in that bill, but says that Real ID, in addition to having that lovely little star, has to also say that you are a citizen on that particular ID. So at this point in time, in Virginia, it does not say that. It doesn't say that in any state that you are a citizen on the Real ID, because it wasn't required by the Real ID Act. The executive order also looks at documentary proof of citizenship, but it was forcing it for the federal voter registration application. So one of the places in this country that has this requirement in its state statutes is Arizona. But because federal law does not require, at this time, documentary proof of citizenship, they have what's now a bifurcated system, which makes it even more complicated. So there are people who can vote only in federal elections, but not local elections if they have not provided documentary proof of citizenship. So passing the SAVE Act, people taking action on the executive order, would cause these kinds of problems. So again, Tyler's asking you to get your Real ID. Don't go rushing there if you don't need to fly before May 7th. But get your Real IDs so you're prepared for what's coming down the line. Happy to respond to any questions when we get to them.
Great,
Pass it
thank
back
you.
to you.
And thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tyler and Liza. I just want to share an example of what I went through when I got my Real ID. And I just got mine a couple weeks ago. I literally got my card about a week ago. But I went online and I went on DMV and I went in the right-hand corner and clicked reserve my spot, and I was able to get an appointment. Right now, the appointments are booked up, but if you use reserve a table when you go to the dinner, get to reserve a table for dinner, if you keep hitting or buy a ticket to a concert, as Tyler says, if you keep hitting refresh button, then people are canceling appointments and you probably can get an appointment. The lines are extremely long. So if you go in there without an appointment, you're probably going to stand in line 2 or 3 hours. I don't know, but it may not be in all localities, but I know I've seen the lines today. But when I went to get my last name really is Knoyton-York, and I kept York because of my son. And he was in school at the time when I got my divorce. So I came, I had my divorce papers, I had a photocopy of my marriage license. I brought two, I brought two copies of my utility bills, right? And all of it had Connoyton-York on it because all it has to all match. Now, when I got up there to the window, before I even went over to get my real ID stuff, to when they check you in, she said, "We can't take your photocopy." And we got Stacy here, and she's going to talk a little bit more about how you can get that. But she said, "You can't take, you have to have an official copy." You know, I knew I didn't have the original. I knew that. I knew that was gone. And so she said, she said, "But you can get one here and it costs $14." Well, later I found out it could be much cheaper if you go to your clerk of court office. And Stacy's going to talk about the role of the clerk of court, that many people don't know really what they do over there. And so I had to get an official, because my divorce papers did not say that I can return to my maiden name. I had to have an official marriage license. And so I got a copy of that. And then I was able to go and get my real ID, go over to the window and then sign up to get my real ID. Now my real ID, they charged me for another license and they charged me $10 for the real ID. So that was $42 that I had to pay. And then I paid $14 for the marriage license. You know, in Virginia, and someone asked a question about voting, it's not required to have ID. You just have to have some form, photo ID, some form of identification. But we just kind of push it. Just bring a photo ID. You don't have to have it, but you need to have. But because the climate that we're in right now, we're encouraging everyone to have it. It was a question that if you have a passport, do you need to have real ID? You know, I have a real ID, I have a passport, and I'm working on my global now. I want everything, just to be on the safe side, because you just don't know what's going to happen under this administration. But however, if you want to fly, you can use your passport. You can use your passport or a federal ID to get into to fly or get into a military or federal building of whatever sort. You can do that. You can use that, but still get your real ID. As we said before, we just don't know what to expect from this administration, and that's why we're having this Zoom today, so that we can talk, so we can tell you what to expect. I'm going to bring Stacy on, and Stacy, if you can tell us the role of the clerk of court, and tell us, what documents can you provide, and is there a cost? Because I heard it was $3 if I would have went there and went to the clerk of court. But anyway, just talk a little bit about the role of the clerk of court's office and what people should do.
Good evening, everyone. So yes, every locality in Virginia has a circuit court clerk, and the circuit court clerk is the official record keeper of records for that locality or jurisdiction. And so when you get married, if you get married in Virginia, you can go to whatever circuit court clerk's office is most convenient for you to get a marriage license. And then you can get married anywhere in the state of Virginia. So one, you have to always remember where you obtained your marriage license in Virginia, because we see that often, where people will think because they lived in Newport News that they obtained their marriage license in Newport News. But sometimes maybe they worked in Williamsburg or they worked in Norfolk. And so it was more convenient for them to go to Norfolk Circuit Court to obtain their marriage license. So in that case, you would go back and visit the circuit court clerk's office where you originally obtained your marriage license. And pretty much throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia, copies in clerk's offices are 50 cents a page, and then an additional $2 to certify them. So for a certified copy of your marriage license, it would be $2.50, which is a lot less than having to pay $14 if you go to DMV. The same as far as if you were to, because divorces are filed typically in the circuit court. And so wherever you may have obtained your final decree, you could go back and visit that circuit court clerk's office to get a certified copy of your final decree. And typically, we see some final decrees, they may not have a lot of of things to have to decide. So they may be 2 pages, whereas we've seen some final decrees that are 20 pages because they had a lot of assets or they had a lot of different issues to be decided in that final decree. So that would really depend, the cost would depend on how long your document is. And typically, as I said, it's 50 cents a page and an additional $2 for the clerk to certify those documents. They will have a seal on it. Typically, there's a raised seal that's on your document that you take to DMV, and that's how they know that is a certified copy. Another option that people have is if you don't recall maybe where you obtained your initial marriage license or where you were divorced in Virginia, you could also contact Vital Records and they can tell you where your divorce decree or your marriage license was filed. And then you could contact that clerk's office to be able to obtain a certified copy. Typically, if you visit a clerk's office, you could go in the same day and get a copy of your marriage license or your final decree if it was filed in that clerk's office. You typically don't have to make an appointment to do that, and they can do that same day. If you go to vacourts.gov, and then you look under Virginia court systems and then circuit courts, there will be a listing of every jurisdiction in Virginia that you could click on. For example, there would be one for Richmond or Henrico or Chesterfield, Virginia Beach, and it has all of the individual circuit court clerk's office information there such that you could click on it and contact your clerk's office to be able to obtain your documents. It makes it much easier when you have all of your documents and you're prepared. So after you've made your appointment, you can go in and get your Real ID where it's not costing you an additional amount than what you're already anticipating paying to get your ID.
So there's a couple scenarios. I was born in Minot, North Dakota, so I had to get my birth certificate from there. Got tongue-tied from there. So if you were born out of state, you can't get your birth certificate in Virginia. Isn't that right?
That's
You
correct.
had to get it from where you were born.
Yes.
You go to and you can get it from the state office in that particular state. Same as if you were married out of state. I have people say, I was married in the Bahamas and the Caribbeans, or I was married in another state. They have to go back to that place where they were married to obtain that marriage license. Is that correct?
That is correct. I was married in Jamaica. And so when I obtained my marriage license from, Jamaica, I made sure that I got 2 or 3 additional copies. So I would always have a certified copy available whenever I may need it because I did get married outside of the country. So definitely, you want to make sure you have your paper and documents in a row. Take the time to go and make sure you have those things. Do a checklist if you need to, and make sure you have your important documents with you because as we see, you never know when you may need them.
So the other question that I have is, you have the divorce papers. Now, men, you don't
Yes.
have half the trouble that women have to go through, with this particular thing, because for the most part, we have to have our divorce papers and we have to have our marriage certificate, basically, for it because just to show that that your name wasn't authorized to be changed back to maiden. That should be in your divorce papers, but just get a listing of all of the different documents and we'll send that out, what you need to have, that you need to have to bring there. We wanted to make sure that you understood that you can get, if you were married in the city that you're in, you can go to that city. So Stacy, if someone was married, say in Northern Virginia and they live in Hampton, Virginia, they have to go to Northern Virginia to get that license, or can they get it locally in the city that they're in? If it was
So
in Virginia.
So you could possibly go to the local Department of Health because that's where it falls under. And so sometimes they may be able, because it's for the state of Virginia, they may be able to go locally to obtain it, but it would be through the Department of Health, is which I was mentioning before, where they can kind of tell you where, because they get, when you're divorced, it's kind of the same as when you get married. There's a little license and there's a report of a divorce that gets filed with the state. And so the state has, everyone's records on file. And so then you could contact them to say, hey, I was divorced in Fairfax and I now live in Newport News. Can I obtain a certified copy of my marriage license from my local health department here? Because the health departments can, do a marriage license or have that information. And so if you're wanting to get your actual final decree and you were divorced in Fairfax, you would have to contact that Fairfax circuit court to get those documents. But it's something,
Great. Okay.
and I'm not sure, like I said, you would really need to contact the local department just to see if they may be able to assist in getting that if you were in Northern Virginia and you may live in a different area altogether.
Is there one place now? Birth certificates can be an issue, especially it could be an issue with someone who was not even born in this country. You
You're
know,
seeing that.
they weren't born in this country, or like I said, they might have forgot what city they were born in or whatever, or they just can't find it or whatever. Is there one place that they can go to maybe perhaps find that?
Again, the Department of Vital Records for the state is
Okay.
probably going to be the biggest resource for that, because even if someone, say, were to change their name here and they are now a resident of Virginia, when they change their name, it goes to the state of Virginia's vital records, but they in turn work with the other states to kind of get that information disseminated to them so that they can, work with that registrar there and for their state to be able to obtain, say, for example, a new birth certificate, but they were born in a different state. So really contacting the state vital records would be really beneficial if you did not, or you were not born in the state, or your records were in another state, because they may be able to direct you and they will have that information to direct you to be able to obtain your documents.
Great, thank you. And that's so important. There are several questions that's been in the chat. Do you need it for voter registration? Do you need it to run for public office? No, the Real ID really is only for if you want to fly domestic flight, or if you want to get in a federal building, you don't have a passport. Why are we encouraging everyone to get a federal ID? I mean, to get a Real ID? Because of the climate that we're in right now, we don't know what this administration might do if you don't have one. We want everyone to be prepared. We don't want to ring that bell and say, you can't do this and you can't do that. You can't vote. You can't register to vote. You can't vote, or you can't run for office if you don't have a Real ID. We don't want to ring that bell. However, we want everyone to be cautious and be prepared in the event that this president might want to put another executive order out. You just never know. You never know that he might do it 60 days out or before then. And by the time it goes to court, the election will be over. So we just want to make sure everyone is prepared, because he might say you might have it for something else. I don't know. This man dreams up things. So we want everyone to be prepared and get a Real ID, especially tell the young people, please go and get your Real ID. And look, if you never understood the importance of keeping your records, this Real ID will tell you the importance of keeping your records so you can go and get a Real ID. The other thing I want to say is that the SAVE Act, yes, we want that to be voted against. Exactly. As Liza said, she says it has to have 60 votes. to go to the floor. And for discussion, and their argument is that it's going to strengthen the voting system, but it's not, so we want to make sure that, we have, and we'll send some information out on that as well, for the Senate piece of it. This is, what about the address? Many people who live in rural areas do not have mailboxes at their houses. Rather, they have mailboxes in the post office. The DMV will not allow a second line to include both the PO box and the physical address. As you may know, physical address IDs are needed for certain purchases. Mailing it to a physical address with no mailbox at a house will be returned. How do you fix this? Can anyone answer that? Stacy, can you answer that?
I'm sorry, that I couldn't really address. That's really a DMV thing. That really is going to be a DMV question. And they kind of govern, they have their own set of rules and how they apply things. So I really wouldn't be able to answer that.
So they won't allow a second line for you to put a PO box if you live in a rural area. Oh, that's something we might need to address and look at that and see why you can't do that. I wonder if that can happen in other states if they do that. Liza, do you know if you can do that in other states, in Florida?
Each state is different. Sorry.
Right, each state is different. That's something that we're gonna need to look into then. Thank you, Thomasine. I'm
And
gonna look
also, one
into.
more thing, Gayleen, if I want to make sure too. Also,
Sure.
if you have older parents or relatives, definitely help them to get their documents as well, because I've seen in our office alone, I've had elderly folks come in and they were telling us that back then in certain times they didn't have birth certificates and they weren't familiar with what their names really were. Like for certain things, I've had ladies come in their late 70s and saying this was the name I've always thought I was born as, and to find out that that's not her last name. And then she had to have or correct her marriage license from like 1920 something. And the fees that then become involved with petitioning the court to change a marriage license, and then to also have to do a legal name change if you're wanting it to be something else. And so those are things that people don't think about as well. So certainly if you have older family members or friends, make sure to be able to help them to locate their documents and what may be necessary for them, because these are extra expenses that are crazy to file in our court to change a petition or your original that's $86. And then you have to pay, additional amount if you're doing a name change, another $41. And so these fees can add up really fast. So definitely make sure if you have loved ones, like I said, to try to help them locate their documents so that they can, have success when they go to get their real IDs, because this is very real and we're seeing it more and more.
There's a question that said that what do you do for people who have dementia? Whoever the guardian is, should have their records. And or they have the power of attorney. My mother had dementia, so I know I went through it, and it's a lot. But let me just say this, your clerk of court is your first line of defense. They can guide you on everything that you need to have. So make sure that if you have a lot of questions or have a certain situation, you can always go to your circuit clerk of court, and they can help direct you to this, because this is a lot. It's in our communities that, when you get down to talk about official documents in the Black and Brown community, it's a disparity. That's why we fought not to have photo ID. That's why we fight against photo ID, because of these disparities. So now you have the real ID and you have to get it. But we're telling everyone, start getting your records together now, especially when these young people are getting married, tell them to hold on, get 2 or 3 copies of their marriage. This is like a good way for us to set our young people on the right path for us to be able to move forward. Tyler said that he will look into it with general counsel about the second line for PO Box, and then we'll be able to circle back around with you. Somebody asked the question, can you use a retired military ID? Is that does anyone know if that is
So a
can you
retired
use that?
military ID is not accepted as a replacement for the real ID, and it is not accepted for for a replacement for real ID. However, it is accepted by TSA as an alternate ID for domestic flights. So it will be accepted for your domestic flights. However, it cannot be used as just an overall catch-all replacement for a real ID. And President Bailey, I see you came off mute as well. I want to make sure that's in alignment with your understanding as well.
In a word, yes.
Also, I want to state that what they're saying now, I heard it was all over the news today, that if you don't have a real ID and you still have to fly, they will pull you off to the side and ask for certain documents, and it's going to be an additional 30 minutes, and you can typically miss your flight. So if you have to fly, find out what documents you need to go to the airport with. If you don't have a real ID, if you don't have a passport, and some of these other items that's required. There's a link that we'll be able to have all acceptable of information that we'll have on that particular piece. I wanted to make sure that right. So I think we answered most of the questions. I'm just double checking to make sure that we have okay, so greetings. We have to come up with resources for persons who may have issues with paying for this. And that's exactly right. It's a disparity. You know, if this president was to make us use a real ID to vote, that's a poll tax. You know, and so you're exactly right. It is. And so we have to figure that out. I did talk to a couple legislators about it too. I said, not everyone have $42. Well, not everyone have money to get these additional documents. We have to think about that as well too. So I'm hoping that, we can maybe get some legislations or get some resources to help with that, because that is definitely going to be an issue. Any other questions? I think we got everything. Karen, did we answer everything?
We did. We answered a lot of the questions. We will also, in the resources that you all receive tomorrow, will provide some detailed answers to a lot of the questions also that you all asked. But yeah, I think we answered everything that has come before us.
Right. So,
Gayleen, there was a question in the Q&A, and they asked if you can't remember where you were married, but we know where they were divorced, will the location of the divorce have information on where you were married? Your divorce would tell where you were married for that particular divorce. If you were married more than once, that's not going to, of course, be as helpful for you. But yes, your divorce should tell you where you were married for that particular marriage. Yes.
Okay, that's great. And you said the vote writers, I see that on here. Thank you, Liza. I appreciate that. That's something I'm going to look into as well. Last thing I just want to say to you all, first of all, is that, please encourage everyone to get a real ID. Please go to your electoral board meetings and find out what's going on. We've been talking since the beginning of the year that, precincts are being what they call realigned, but it's closed. They're being closed. But also start advocating for Sunday vote. Regardless if you're going to get it or not, advocate for it. Talk to your clergy. We have sent out talking points in the past. I'll find those talking points, and so we can include that in the follow-up. But bring your clergy with you to this electoral board meeting. Find out when they're going to talk about Sunday vote. But if you don't bring it up, they're not going to talk about it. Start doing it now. May is in a couple weeks, And so we want you to start thinking about, know when your electoral board meeting is. No, you should know who your electoral board members are, especially the one that's friendly to our agenda. Ask them what is ask them, when is it going to come up? And then when you come, be prepared, bring people with you, members with you, and bring the clergy with you, and to have everyone ready to speak. Because if you don't advocate if you don't advocate for Sunday vote, you won't get it. And so we want to make sure that we get that. We know that early vote for this primary is coming up on May the 2nd. That's when it starts. And then it starts in September for November, but we'll send out important dates for you as well. So with that, I want to thank you, Tyler and Stacy and Liza, for being on here today. I think this is some good information. You'll be able to share this video, with others and your other members. But as we said before, use your circuit clerk of court as your first line of defense. If you have any questions or have any confusion, they can help direct you to where you need to go. So we really appreciate that. Reverend Bailey, you want to close us out?
Sure, if I can find the mute button. Was that an ask for a benediction? I'm just kidding, Galen. Um, I want to thank our panel of experts who have provided incredibly thoughtful and content-filled information. Tyler, I've come to understand nothing, less than what you presented tonight. And to Liza and Stacy, thank you all also. Disclaimer, I don't know if Stacy and I are related, but we probably are. This has been a point that our political action committee has been pushing for quite some time to ensure that, again, the correct and accurate information was provided to our people. As I said in our opening remarks, to bust the myths and ensure that everyone understands the truths. And so, in summary, I think what you heard is that it is not necessarily absolutely a requirement to have a real ID, but the NAACP in the Commonwealth absolutely endorses everyone to do that for the reasons that have been stated. So again, for all the organizers and all the presenters, I thank you all very much. And everyone have a great day, rest of the evening.
Great, thank you. Bye-bye.